Despite our many concerns about the offense, the Week 1 film showed that the Falcons' defense mostly worked.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right. So, guys, if you don't know me, I am your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong here on this illustrious podcast, where you may also know me as Mr. Drew, as the Jolly Green Giant, as Sirius Black, as the iron that sharpens the iron. You also may know me as Mr. AKA. And I thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this pod that makes it your first listen, your first watch each and every day. And all you have to do is become an everydayer, is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is all about the Week 1 All-22 review. I watched the film. We'll focus mostly on the defense. At the end of today's episode, we'll talk about the offense a little bit more and revisit some of the topics we've been talking about since Sunday. And, you know, the conversation surrounding the Falcons is about the quarterback. And to me, this is another symptom of people believing that the quarterback, you know, we're a quarterback away. And so the conversation is going to be centered around, hey, do we replace the quarterback? And that's going to solve our problems. And I'll explain to you guys why I still don't think that's a solution to the Falcons' current problems. But, you know, we've talked so much about the offense. Let's give some love to the defense. And before we get into that, we got to talk about the roster move that the Falcons made for the offense today. They finally filled that 53rd roster spot by signing offensive tackle Brandon Parker, formerly of the Raiders and 49ers. Parker wasn't particularly good with the Raiders for 5 years that he played for them. You know, I'm sure some of you guys are reading into this, that this is a Caleb McGarry replacement after Caleb McGarry struggles. Not the case. I think this is just the Falcons wanting another tackle on the roster, another body there. They cut Julian Davenport to free up a practice squad spot for Nate Peterman last week. And I think this is just a guy that Dwayne Leverett probably has a soft spot for, because he recruited him basically a decade ago when he was at App State. And, you know, Parker wound up going to North Carolina A&T, similar to kind of how, you know, Dwayne Leverett tried to recruit Javon Gwynn when he was at NC State. And, you know, he's managed to stick around. So I think that's really what this is about, but we'll see on that front. But let's talk about the defense. It was a mostly conservative game plan for the Falcons, and it was mostly effective, right? You know, one of the things I chart is their coverage shells. The Falcons, as expected, were predominantly working out of the cover 3. I had them playing cover 3 on 14 out of 29 plays, so about 48%, so about half the time. They mixed in some other coverage looks, mostly cover 2, cover 4, cover 6. You didn't see a lot of man coverage, though. I only charted a single play of man coverage. I know PFF didn't have them playing in man coverage for any snaps in this game, but it looked like to me they were in cover 5 or 2-man under, where you have a 2-high safety look in man coverage underneath. And that came at the end of the first quarter on that 3rd and 12, where Pickens beat A.J. Terrell, and he got knocked down just shy of the sticks, but the refs marked him for a first down, and there was some confusion on that play because the Falcons thought it was 4th and 1, and the Steelers were like 1st and 10, and, you know, that you remember that play. So that was the only instance to me that the Falcons, I determined the Falcons were in man coverage. And it sort of confirms what we thought this was going to be, a zone heavy defense. Didn't think it would be, 100% or, 97% zone coverage like it was in this game. Most teams even the teams that use man coverage the least typically are using it 15 to 20% of the time. And so the Falcons having it less than that is notable. But it may have just simply been specific to their Week 1 game plan with Justin Fields at playing quarterback for them. You know, you want to minimize how many instances where the defensive backs have to turn their back to the quarterback. They did play match coverage, so outside corners did turn their back to the quarterback at times. But, in terms of strictly man coverage, where everybody in the backs, or at least most guys in the back 7, at least five of the guys in the back 7 are turning their back to the quarterback, they didn't necessarily want to do. And part of the reason why they may not have wanted to play man coverage is because of a certain linebacker that got the majority of snaps next to Kaden Elliss. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the pod, referring to Nate Landman and not wanting to put him in a position where he might struggle in that regard. But that one play that I charted as man coverage also was one of two plays where the Falcons played dime defense, where they had Kevin King operating at their sixth defensive back instead of Richie Grant. And again, that might have been matchup based because of the Steelers' prevalence of using tight ends, which they had two or more tight ends on the field for, I think, 60% of their snaps in this game. Maybe they wanted a bigger body like Kevin King rather than Richie Grant serving as that sixth defensive back in this game. We didn't see any snaps for Richie Grant on defense in this game. And maybe that continues in the coming weeks. Maybe that changes week to week. We'll sort of have to depend. Obviously a lot of that will depend on it. Kevin King gets a permanent elevation to the 53-man roster where he's currently on the practice squad. But we'll see on that. Now, another thing, when I say the Falcons were conservative in this game plan, another part of that, in addition to playing so much zone, was the Falcons didn't really dial up a ton of pressure. They were kind of relying on rushing with 4 for most of the game to get pressure. I only counted 6 plays where the Falcons brought really any type of pressure, and some of that was 4-man pressures, some of that was 5-man pressures, and one of those 6 plays was nullified by a penalty. That happened to be a 36-yard pass to Pickens that was wiped out by that phantom OPI call. And so that was the one time that they got burned by bringing pressure. And then there was another play where I counted them bringing pressure on a cornerback blitz because Mike Hughes kind of, shot up the field. But part of me thinks he was doing that because he was reading the play action in the backfield and he was coming to downhill to set the edge. But it wound up being a pass play. So counted that as a blitz and whatnot, where Fields wound up scrambling on that play instead of handing the ball off. And so when you look at the 4 times where I can say definitively, yes, the Falcons were they meant to blitz. They meant the pressure on that particular play. Pittsburgh didn't find any success. They had a 0% success rate. Fields completed like 1 2-yard pass and then threw the ball away on another Mike Hughes blitz and whatnot. And so again, that one play that didn't count because it was nullified by a bad phantom penalty call. And so, when you guys say, hey, the refs are always against the Falcons, they weren't always against the Falcons. They were definitely in the Falcons' favor on Sunday. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. But another play also was a green dog blitz as well. And for those of you that don't know, a green dog blitz is when usually it's a linebacker and usually it's a running back, where a linebacker basically blitzes depending on if the running back stays in the block or not. And if the running back releases, he goes in coverage. If the running back stays in the block, he brings the heat. So overall, it paints the picture of what I said earlier, that it was a generally conservative game plan for Jimmy Lake and the Falcons defense. To me, it was a lot of them embracing that bend but don't break style. And again, going up against a conservative Steelers offense that was going to run the football, that doesn't necessarily have, elite playmakers. They have good players on that offense, but not necessarily guys that are like, oh, fear God, although, George Pickens did do some work in that game. And maybe we need to start considering him as a guy that can put the fear of God in you. But it made sense for Pittsburgh. And to me, what's going to be interesting, is are they going to play that bend but don't break style against the Eagles, right? Where I don't know if they're going to get as conservative in offense. And Philadelphia has a lot more firepower, at least in terms of the skill positions, than Pittsburgh has. And their offensive line is a lot better than what Pittsburgh has. And so they'll be more willing to crank it up in that regard. And so do you try to dial up pressure in order to, offset that potential disadvantage that you may have in the trenches if you just rely on 4 guys to get pressure, right? That was something that Philadelphia struggled with mightily last year against the blitz. Jalen Hurts' production against the blitz was not very good based off of certain metrics like EPA and whatnot. But from what I gather, again, I haven't gone back and sat here and watched the film. By the time you next hear me on the podcast, when we do the crossover with Locked On Eagles, I will have watched that film completely against the Packers. But by all accounts, it seemed like, Hurts and the Eagles offense was much more effective against the blitz in week 1 against the Packers than they had been for most part last year. And so I'll be curious to see where the Falcons fall. Do they get more aggressive? Do they want to bring pressure? Do they want to test the Eagles and say, hey, you struggled against the blitz last year. Let's see if you've really fixed that problem. Or do they sit back and play that bend but don't break style, especially given some of the issues on offense and just playing, hey, we're just going to, hopefully not get beat and give up the points or whatever and try to win a low-scoring game, maybe the style. So we'll see how that goes. But another element that, stood out to me on film on Sunday was the usage of Troy Andersen and Nate Landman. and why Nate Landman got the majority of snaps, but the Falcons were very selective with how they use Troy Andersen, and we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, I want to keep telling you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and now FanDuel is offering something a little different. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And with that YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. And all you need is a Google account and current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. And while you're there, go check out the line for the Falcons-Eagles upcoming Monday night matchup, where the Eagles are favored by 6.5 points. Do you feel like the Falcons can make up the ground, or did you get disheartened by their performance in week 1 against the Pittsburgh Steelers? Or maybe you're feeling like, hey, I'm going to stay away from the Atlanta Falcons. I'm going to go check out the odds to see, the other local team that's actually good at football by the Georgia Bulldogs and put some money on them winning the national championship. Why not make it $5 so that you can get that free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket for 3 weeks? So go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. So Locked On Falcons has been a battle line in what I'm going to now call the Trojan War. And I'm sure some of you guys, your mind is in the gutter. Get it out the gutter. Not referring to that Trojan. Okay. Of course, I'm instead of referring to the battle lines that have been drawn, but which linebacker is going to line up next to Kaden Elliss, right? It's Troy Andersen or Nate Landman. And we'll talk about what I saw along that battle line, as a war correspondent in the Trojan War in week 1. But if you want to know what's going on elsewhere in the NFL in week 1, make sure you check out the new Locked On NFL podcast, where you get 2 shows daily, first with Tyler Rowland and then with Tony Wiggins, to give you all the stories, all the lowdown going on with the other 31 teams in addition to the Atlanta Falcons. Find it on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So in week 1, the Steelers played a healthier amount of 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers, than the Falcons did under Arthur Smith, right? It was about 40% of their plays were 11 personnel, about 28 plays. The Falcons matched that pretty consistently nearly every time with 5 defensive backs in their nickel defense. And when they did play nickel, Troy Andersen was on the field as that linebacker next to Kaden Elliss, right? Kaden Elliss played 100% of the snaps. Troy Andersen and Nate Landman split the snaps. Andersen wound up playing about 46% of the snaps. That extra 6% is due to the Falcons occasionally matching, the Steelers' 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets with their nickel. Landman played the remaining 54% of the snaps, primarily in the Falcons' base defense. Although Landman did get 2 snaps at the end of the game when the Steelers were in 11 personnel, which is why I said nearly every time, where those 2 plays came in the red zone in the 4th quarter. And that included that 4th and 1 stop that, Landman did his little Polamalu leap, his little ode, his little head nod to Troy Polamalu leaping and getting that stop on 4th and 1. Now, having these 2 guys split reps like this and having one guy play base, one guy play nickel, is that, to me, sustainable? I tend to be very skeptical whether or not that is something that you can continue to do each and every week. But, maybe, again, that depends on matchups, right? Philadelphia is overwhelmingly an 11 personnel team. Against Green Bay, they played that 65% of the time. Last year, they played it 70% of the time. They do mix in some 12 personnel and other looks. And against Green Bay, that was mostly in short yardage situations, goal-to-goal situations, and occasionally on 1st and 10 when they wanted to run the ball. And so there still could be a role for Nate Landman in week 2 in those types of situations for the Falcons. But you got to remember that still, for most of teams in the NFL, like the Eagles, most teams major in 11 personnel, those 3 wide receiver sets, which teams then confront with nickel. And that's on average, league-wide, that's about 60% of the time. So again, most weeks on average, it seems like Troy Anderson's probably going to, if the Falcons continue to play this style, Troy Anderson's going to have a larger role to play in this defense than Nate Landman is going to have. Now, it's been a while since a team that I have been aware of has done what the Falcons did in week 1, which is we're going to have a base linebacker and we're going to have a nickel linebacker, and we're going to swap those 2 guys out, right? The last time I remember a team doing this in earnest, and maybe I'm misremembering an instance, but was the 2012 Broncos, right? When that team had a 37-year-old Keith Brooking. Yeah, I'm sure you guys all forgot that Keith Brooking played in Denver. And he would play in the base downs in the second half of that year after they had a couple of injuries there. And then they would replace him on nickel situations with I think, then rookie Danny Trevathan. And you're probably sitting here, Aaron, did you just compare a washed Keith Brooking to Nate Landman? And no, I did not make that comparison. That's where your mind went. I wasn't clearly making that comparison. But, that having a base linebacker and a sub linebacker or a nickel linebacker was a relatively common occurrence back in the day, like 20 years ago in the NFL, when the league wasn't as much a passing league as it has been over the last, nearly 20 years. To me, that shift where we went from, the running league to the passing league began depending on, who you ask and how you time it out, either in 2006 or 2007. So clearly by 2012, we hadn't completely phased that element out, but I just haven't noticed any other team doing it in the league. And to me, the reason for that is because good teams are going to probably exploit it, right? Good teams are going to dictate what you do based off of their formations, right? They'll basically get in the 21 with a fullback or two running backs or 12 personnel with two tight ends and force you to play base defense. And then they'll basically circle that guy that you don't think is good enough to play in coverage, in the Falcons case, Nate Landman, and just spam that all day and just like, we'll just eat all day. And so if I'm a team like the Chiefs, right, I can imagine trying to do that with Travis Kelce or Rashee Rice or something like that and just force, and do that. Now, not every team is going to do that each and every week, but generally speaking, the good teams are going to exploit those weaknesses. And generally speaking, you don't want to necessarily do things that good teams are going to exploit. Like, the goal is to build a good defense that won't be exploited by good teams and whatnot. And so, you could also see the opposite is true, where a team will say, hey, if Troy Andersen is not as effective against the run, we'll force you to play nickel and we'll just run the ball down your throat. Troy Andersen is not as effective a run defender as Nate Landman, right? And for those of you that are new to this podcast or, don't know where our battle lines have been drawn in this Trojan War, right? My guy Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta, he's on King Agamemnon's side. He's supporting the Greeks in this, Trojan War. That means he's supporting Nate Landman. And the thing that Nate Landman does really well is he's a downhill run thumper, especially between the tackles. Now, if you're asking him to do literally anything else that a linebacker is asked to do in the NFL, Nate Landman becomes a lot iffier, right? You want that sideline to sideline pursuit? You want that coverage ability? But hey, he can take on a blocker better than a lot of guys, at the linebacker position, not only on this football team, but also in this league. Now, I happen to be supporting King Priam's side, supporting Troy, right? And I appreciate the 40 of you that understand where I'm going with these weird analogy with the Trojan War stuff. Your history. But to me, the reason why I support that is because to me, Troy has a higher ceiling, has greater potential to do more things well, right? He has that speed to go sideline to sideline. He has that speed and coverage potential and athletic ability, and coupled with the blitzing ability, right? That speed allows him to be an effective pass rusher, not because he's the next Micah Parsons, which, a couple of Falcon fans seem to think that we should just move him full-time to edge. He's an effective pass rusher because he can get from point A to point B really fast. It's the same reason why Deion Jones, I think, led the team in sacks in 2020, because he can get from point A to point B really fast, not because Deion Jones is a great pass rusher, right? And so the knock on Troy Andersen up to this point has been that potential, that ceiling that we're talking about, is more potential and ceiling than it is actual substance and performance on the field at this point, which is what Jarvis and the other Greeks supporters out there are sort of saying of why they're like, just put Nate Landman. The floor for Landman is higher because you know what he's going to bring to the table. The ceiling might be higher for Troy Andersen, but the floor may potentially lower. And again, watching the film, I think there's evidence to suggest that, right? I think for this defense to be the best version it can be, they need to develop Troy Andersen into the best player that he can be. And if there's growing pains with that, that are often associated with a young player, I think so be it. You got to live with that. I don't know if old man Brooking, and now I am comparing to old man Brooking, I don't know if he's going to take your defense to that next level. But, we'll talk about some of the things that Troy and Nate do. Not here on the podcast. That's for the extended all 22 review that I do for the Locked On Falcons insiders each and every week, where not only do I talk about the things like I do on this podcast to you guys, the everydayers and whatnot, but the insiders actually get the film breakdowns and stuff. And so I have a couple of plays breaking down both Landman and Andersen's skill set from that week 1 game, talking about Landman's downhill ability, including that 4th and 1 leap on that play, and some of the issues that show some of the issues that I'm talking about with Nate Landman, some of his weaknesses. And the same goes with Troy Andersen, some of the good things that Troy Andersen brings to the table and some of the negative things that he brings to the table, so that you can decide which side you're going to support in this Trojan War. So that is there for you for if you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider. Link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. And of course, if you sign up today, you get a 14-day free trial. So you get that breakdown for free, and probably the next breakdown I do for the game of the Philadelphia Eagles game before you have to pay potentially $4.99 a month after that point, if you decide, hey, this is a great product, like all things Locked On, your team every day, and I'm willing to pay, $5 a month for this great product. Basically, $1.25 per, extended all 22 review. And for, the dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of Locked On Falcons insiders that are currently, either currently active or just waiting in the wings, waiting for their chance to sign up, most of those people seem to believe that it is a good product. So go check it out if you haven't already for free. But that's going to end our conversation about the Falcons defense. And instead, we're going to talk about, the ongoing issue that's going to continue to consume the Falcons for the next few days and or weeks here on the podcast, which is, what do the Falcons do about the quarterback? And for me, again, all this talk about, hey, we got to change the quarterback, to me is ignoring the real problems for the Atlanta Falcons. And that is not something that is new. And we'll break down why I think that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Guys, passion, drive, patience. It is the formula for winning championships, and is also what's going to keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And they have 122 million parts. And one of those parts that I myself have ordered from eBay Motors over the summer is those seatbelt covers. I'm really into style. I'm trying to do my best to maintain my very old and busted vehicle, right? It ain't got a lot of speed. It ain't got a lot of power, and it's certainly far from its peak performance, but I'm doing my best to maintain it. And one of the ways I did that is by ordering seatbelt covers to make it look a little bit better, so that you don't see how frayed and old the interior of that car, just a little bit, ignore the duct tape elsewhere in the interior of the car. But eBay Motors, the thing about them is they have that eBay guaranteed fit, which means my part is guaranteed to fit my ride every time, your money back. And I can swear by that with those seatbelt covers, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. So our next episode, your first listen here on Locked On Falcons, will probably be crossover Thursday with either one of the hosts of Locked On Eagles. I forget which one, Louis or Gino, does the crossovers. But that will probably be your next episode. But we'll wrap up today's episode talking about how much here on the Locked On Falcons podcast, all I do is spit facts, right? And it's not because, everything I say is right? I didn't get everything right about last week's game. I got a lot of things wrong about last week's game. But the reason why I got it wrong was because I made the mistake of believing that this coaching staff would put together a coherent, functional game plan, especially on offense, right? No shade at the defense. Defense did fine, right? As we discussed earlier. Now, what I haven't really gotten wrong, though, is about Kirk Cousins, because I've spent here on this podcast 6 months telling you guys, hey, Kirk tends to start the season slow. Kirk's lack of mobility could be a problem if the Falcons' pass protection doesn't hold up, and he doesn't have a big-time arm. And so Sunday, Kirk starts slow. The arm strength and mobility become question marks, and everybody goes, who could have possibly seen this coming? If only there was somebody out there that would have warned us of this eventuality. But, I'm not going to spend as much time talking about the quarterback on this podcast as probably other people will, right? Because to me, all of those issues that we're dealing with Kirk Cousins, to me, can be easily overcome with good coaching. And what we saw on Sunday, to me, was not good coaching. It was bad coaching. And, we talked about it in the lead up to the week, this so-called top 5 offensive line that everybody's been hyping up. And, so many people said, I didn't know what I was talking about when I was sitting here not asking like this offensive line was great. And, I know Pro Football Focus had Kirk pressured on 39% of his 28 dropbacks. My charting had one more pressure, so 43% of his dropbacks, if you include the 4 other plays that were nullified by penalties, that number would be 46% of his dropbacks. And if you're an everydayer of this podcast, you know that sort of magic number on what is good pressure versus bad pressure, right? If you're a pass rush, you want that number to be above 35%. So clearly, if you're an offensive line, you want to keep that number below 35%. And the Falcons did not do that on Sunday, right? And everybody got beat. Matthews gave up 4 pressures by my tally. Bergeron gave up 4 pressures. Dolman 3. Lindstrom 3 or 4, depending on if you want to blame him for, a free hit that Larry Ogunjobi got because he was trying to help Caleb McGarry deal with TJ Watt. And of course, Caleb McGarry gave up 4 in that game. Now you contrast that with, Pittsburgh, where PFF said they only gave up pressure on 21% of Justin Fields' 29 dropbacks. By my count, I had the Falcons pressuring them a little bit more, about 28% of the time. So still below that 35% mark, but, we know the pass rush still needs a little bit work, but part of the reason why the Falcons pass rush was not as effective is in part due to Arthur Smith's play call, right? The Steelers ran play action a league high 52% of the time last week, right? And they often use their tight ends to stay in and block and on max protect calls, right? Arthur Smith's game plan was designed to hide his offensive line's pass protection roles, right? That's something that he did on a regular basis the last 2 years in Atlanta, right? Where they were one of the highest rates of play action passing teams, and they often kept their tight ends in to block, to help and protect the quarterback. That's good coaching, putting your players in a position to succeed, or at least not putting your players in a position to fail, which was something absent from the Falcons, where the Falcons were clearly, like so many of my commenters, drinking the Kool-Aid that this was an elite offensive line. Now, they'll still have plenty of opportunities. They got some great D-lines coming up against Philadelphia and Kansas City, where they'll get another chance to prove how good they are. But, they didn't quite look at it. And to me, this is why, we're never going to have the conversation about the game plan and the play calling and how the coaches put, the onus on this offensive line versus that offensive line, because the conversation is only about the quarterback. And I understand it, as I said yesterday, right? Quarterbacks get all the credit when the team wins, all the blame when the team loses. But what frustrates me is this, what I perceive to be the sickness that still continues to permeate so many Falcon fan brains, which is this sickness that thinks that this team is just a quarterback away. And that manifests itself this week in wondering, is Kirk healthy? And should we replace him with Michael Penix? And does that give the team a better chance of winning? And I sit here and go, how does replacing Kirk Cousins with Penix solve your problems? How, right? Does playing Penix solve the fact that this team didn't use any play action, didn't use any misdirection really in their offense outside of one play on that 4th and 1 call, right? Does playing Penix mean that you're going to actually have a functional, coherent game plan to deal with a Pro Bowl pass rusher like TJ Watt? Are you going to stop telegraphing your plays because you simply put Michael Penix on the play, where we saw on Sunday where when the Falcons were in shotgun, they were overwhelmingly throwing the football. When they were in pistol, they were overwhelmingly running the football. And that same is true when they were in 11 personnel equals pass, 12 personnel equals run, right? The Falcons, when they were in 11 personnel, they threw it 80% of the time. In 12% of personnel, they threw it 68% of the time. Meanwhile, you contrast that with Pittsburgh, who in 11 personnel threw it 57% of the time. In 12 personnel threw it 56% of the time. So what they did, and if you go look it up, on average, NFL teams throw the ball on any given down, regardless of formation, about 58% of the time. So Pittsburgh was not tipping their hand, right? But to me, I can't help but notice that Venn diagram of folks, right, that are like, we need to replace Kirk Cousins, that were also, 11 months ago sitting here touting how we need to bench Desmond Ridder because he's going to save our season, right? If we just bench Desmond Ridder, all of our problems go away, right? Imagine if you invented time travel and you went back to October or November of last year, and you wound up accidentally creating a time paradox and running into your past self. And of course, as the universe is fraying at the seams, and hopefully someone does invent this technology so that the universe does end and you can end my suffering of being a Falcon fan for the last three decades. But you run into your past self, and as your past self, he or she is disintegrating into dust, like it's in game. They're probably yelling at you, does Taylor Heineke save our season? And then the last thing you do before you wind up disintegrating is you slap that person across the face because you just heard that person, your past self, say the dumbest thing that you've ever heard. Because of course, now of course, Taylor Heineke wasn't going to save the Falcons season. You know that. Now, Of course, there was somebody back then, I can't remember who, maybe a certain humble podcast host, but he's probably too humble to acknowledge it, was telling you that back then, but no one cared because all those people just wanted to believe was, hey, especially starting after that London game, hey, if we bench Ridder, it's going to solve all our problems. Now, as I said then, there was a time and place for potentially entertaining the possibility of benching Ridder for Taylor Heineke, but it wasn't certainly then, and it wouldn't basically happen until week 15, if my humble opinion, after he threw that pick against the Carolina Panthers. And, we may get to a point later this season where there's a time and place where we do need to seriously entertain benching Kirk for Michael Penix. That may be the right call. That's why we've added level 5 to the Kirk Cousins chaos meter, which is, hey, is the time now for benching Kirk Cousins and playing Michael Penix? Is it time? Right? But we're not there yet. And too many of the Falcons' other problems have to get solved first before we get there. Just like I told you at the end of last year, the Falcons have a lot of problems, but everybody just wants to focus on, hey, it's the coach, hey, it's the quarterback, and just ignore all these other problems. And to me, that's where I'm upset, because it's happening again, where we're just looking at all these other problems that this team has structurally in their offense, and you just want to throw a rookie to the wolves and say, hey, go make it work, Michael Penix. Like, good luck, guys. Good luck. But you got to purge yourself of that sickness of just stop thinking, hey, the Falcons are a quarterback away and they're away from other things. There's 4 other things that they're away from, right? Maybe an OC away, maybe an offensive line upgrade away, right? Maybe a more weapons, more speed at the wide receiver position, maybe a pass rush away, right? All of those things, cornerback away, all that stuff. Those are the things that the Falcons need to address, not just, hey, let's just swap out the quarterback and hope it solves all of our other problems when we know it's not going to. And I think that's the reality that more people need to wake up to as you spend the next couple of days convincing yourself, hey, Michael Penix can solve all of our problems. Right? Again, this is not a shot at Michael Penix. He's definitely a better player than Taylor Heineke or anything like that. But throwing that guy to the wolves when you have all these other issues that you can't solve. Like, I'm not going to sit here and trust at this point in time. Again, I need to see Zach Robinson show me that he can put together a coherent game plan and not telegraph plays and have the defense figure it out, 15 minutes into the game and be like, oh, we know exactly what they're doing, before I'm going to sit here and trust him to develop a young quarterback, which, by the way, again, this is what I talked about 2 years ago with Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot when we drafted Desmond. None of these guys have successfully developed a young quarterback. So, again, we want to believe that they have the capability of doing so, but Raheem's never done it. Zach Robinson's never done it. None of these guys have done it. TJ Yates has never done it, right? So we sit here, TJ Yates, I guess he can claim like 4% ownership for Deshaun Watson, which doesn't look particularly good right now. So, good luck with that. But we'll see how the Falcons address these other issues, or these more immediate issues, and we'll see how Kirk Cousins responds in the coming weeks, what adjustments are made on defense. All of that will be things that we will explore. We will continue to talk about this upcoming Week 2 Monday night matchup with Locked On Eagles on your crossover Thursday. And, of course, we'll be back later this week to talk with Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta and see where he weighs in on the new battle lines in the Trojan War. So that is going to do it for us, guys. Appreciate it. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL and other shows across the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.